of my life. My dear friends, time to give a big round of applause to the shark on the screen. And we got Jim Griffin in the house. Give it up for Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. You left out barbecue. This
Barbecue.
is a big miss.
Oh,
yeah.
The best.
When you're talking about Austin, the best
music, barbecue, end of South by Southwest. Oh my, I've never had a better music experience in my life. If you haven't been to South by Southwest, I recommend it. Speak to Jim about that later. Thank you.
All right. So this is going to be a nice opportunity to find a middle space between sort of the, what I call the hello world of Ultralytics. You know, that first time that you use Ultralytics and you find that bus, the famous bus. And the other end of the spectrum is perhaps we already saw earlier this afternoon with the detecting of the cattle and identifying individual cattle and understanding their behaviors, which I forget, was it 2 million images that had to be trained and so forth. So this is something in between, but it's not so easy. So it was not too long ago that we had let's see, how's this? Oh, it's moving. So there was a news story that came out on multiple channels talking about a shark detection program that occurred in Santa Barbara area at a beach called Padaro Beach. And that's a beach where surfers and sharks are frequently found, sometimes together. And of course, it's easy to detect a shark if it bites you. So, but what we wanted to do is identify the sharks beforehand. And so these news stories that came out were interesting, but they kind of lacked a little bit of the detail behind. So what I wanted to share with you today is a little bit of the detail of what happened in order to make this program come to life. What's under the hood? What parts were easy and what parts were more difficult to do? So first of all, for context, this program was called SharkEye, and it was sponsored by the University of Santa Barbara. And let me just show you what that website looks like. So here, if you were to navigate, you could even do that now online. You could find the SharkEye website. So it's a system that flies drones over the ocean water near this Padaro Beach, and then it sends back signals to identify if it found a shark. And what I'd like to do is share with you, for example, this is what the dashboard looks like. And there you can see a recent dashboard. This is for 12 weeks, and you can see that there were 2 large sharks, tiburones, and 15 smaller ones. So what you can infer is that there's about a little bit more than 1 shark per week. You just don't want to be encountered by that particular guy. And one of the things that I think is interesting to talk about in this regard is the person who led this effort. You can see here on screen, his name is Neil Nathan, and he's the one who put this whole program together. We're going to talk more about him because his skills wouldn't necessarily align to those of many of you in this room. And that's an important point because what we're going to be talking about is how this software really helps to facilitate more democratization of these kinds of efforts. So, as I mentioned, what he's doing, or this whole program is doing, is sending drones out with high-resolution cameras. They're flying at about 200 feet above the ocean surface. They're sending back information in real-time video. About 80 people are following or getting the alerts from the system. Those people can be the lifeguards, naturally. They can be owners of surf shops. They can be parents of children who are taking surf lessons on the beach. Anyone who wanted to sign up for those alerts. So that's interesting. It's sending back the alerts, but the question is, how does it know when it saw a shark? So here we are at the GitHub page for SharkEye. And as we take a look at that, you can see at the top of the screen that there are more than 20 references there to Ultralytics. So obviously, the underlying technology is Ultralytics. Specifically, as everybody else in this room has shown, of course, YOLO version 8, because version 11 didn't exist yet until that time. And what we have here is an abstraction layer that basically is making it easy for the likes of Neil Nathan to implement a program like this. So obviously, Neil and that entire team that you saw before did a great job on this program. It was followed by, multiple news stories. So you got a lot of press, and you can also see the program running here. So you can see it detecting a shark. Okay, there's one. It's a great white shark, so forth. So it's working well, and we're going to get the statistics about this at the very end. But what I'd like to show you here is that Neil he has a master's degree, but it's not a master's in computer science. It's a master's in environmental studies. But still, he was able to do it simply because, as we were talking about before, that there's this abstraction layer that's helping to make it easy. Now, what I'd like to do is set up a comparison between what I will call the hello world of Ultralytics. Here it is, Colab. This is going to be our point of comparison. And everyone in this room will have seen this before. So we're going to load and do the fine tuning. You're going to recall probably this, as you've seen before, the famous bus with the people in front of the bus and detecting that, all of which is done with 6 lines of code. So let's just review what is happening here. You can see there the 6 lines of code, and let's focus specifically on that first part, the key line. You can see the YOLO version 8, of course the N standing for nano. And we know, all of us in this room, we're just talking about our baseline, what we're comparing against, that this line of code or this particular pre-trained model, N, is applicable for mobile uses or for any kind of edge device. And so we also know that there's also a small, a medium, large, and an extra large model, and we know that those all have their own particular trade-offs and use cases that would be applicable for them. In addition, we can see in that line of code that we've got COCO 128. So that's what the model is being trained on. And we all know that COCO stands for Common Objects in Context. So COCO, as we know, is 20,000 plus images in that entire database. And those images are defined or organized into 80 different classes. And so this model that we're talking about right now, where we do our Hello World project, is obviously just a very small fraction of that total COCO database of only just 128 images. It's very small. So what is this used for? It's used mostly for debugging or for demos like we're doing today. So now, if we take a look at this, there's the code, and that's the context for Hello World. Now, let's summarize again. We've got this pre-trained model, which is the YOLO version 8N in this particular case, and then we did the training using COCO 128. So now, let's move away from Hello World into a more difficult situation, which is not a Hello World task. This task is to try to identify sharks underwater from a drone at the distance that I just described, mixed in with other animals that are shaped in a similar way to the sharks, like seals and otters, and in a situation where maybe there might be seaweed floating that kind of looks like a shark, mixed in with waves, choppy waves, or glare from the sun, and all of this being done from a drone with a very small camera, a camera that may be exposed to a salty and very humid environment. So that's the situation that we're trying to address here. So what we'll do is talk now about what is required to train that model. And the answer is, in this case, 15,000 images only. It's really not that many. So 15,000 images, that's based upon 5 years of drone surveys. So those surveys taken at Padaro Beach. Now, I think you can infer that the main work of this project then was not AI. The main work of this project definitely was flying those drones over for 5 years and culling the images out of those videos and tagging them appropriately, which ones are sharks and which ones are not. The actual training of the model, maybe some of you can guess in your minds what the training would cost, time, based upon some of the other things that we've heard. About 20 hours of training time only. So definitely that wasn't the hard part of the project. And that training was done using T4 GPUs. So many of us have got access to more powerful GPUs if we're using the cloud. So an A100, which is probably what I would be using, is much more powerful. That probably represents something like 3 to maybe 5 of the T4 GPUs. So basically that 20 hours might be for you and me 5 hours of training to get this very advanced model ready to go. In any case, whether it's 5 or 20, it's less than a day to get the whole model ready to go once those 15,000 images are ready and tagged. So here we are again with those 6 lines of code. And so I'm going to tell you what the accuracy was from this. And by the way, you might ask yourself, why is he talking about accuracy? Most of the time, people are interested in recall. If we're, looking, say, for example, in cancer, in X-rays of lungs, for example, what we care about is recall. Of all the cases that were cancer, how many of them did I find? That's recall. That's what we normally care about. And you would think I would care about recall in this case as well. We're measuring precision. We've got 92% precision. What precision is measuring is, of all the cases that I identified as a shark, how many were a shark? Why am I not measuring recall? Because I don't know what the recall is. I don't know if I missed any sharks. But the 92% precision is excellent. And that precision can be compared to what humans are able to do. And I think I need to make it advance. There we go. So the humans were able to identify 60%. So you may ask yourself, why is it the humans are not as good at identifying sharks? These are experts. And in fact, it was the humans that were able to determine what the 92% accuracy was. So why is there a gap there? And if you think about it, you can immediately find the answer to that. It's because we're human. It's like, imagine, no matter how expert you or I might be at identifying sharks, if we have to sit in front of a screen all day long looking for sharks, eventually we're gonna, mind is gonna wander or whatever. So practically speaking, it's just because humans can't concentrate that hard for that long of a period of time. And that's one of the advantages of AI. So that pretty much summarizes the benefits of this particular program. It's kind of in between in terms of complexity. certainly well ahead of Hello World, and I would say less complex than the cattle example that we saw. And I would say if any of you are interested in connecting with me, I'm interested in connecting with you. I've met about half a dozen of you that I definitely think should be on the stage, even more so than me. You are very interesting people out there, and I would love to interview some of you for the podcast. So that's it. I turn it over to you.
Outstanding. Big round of applause for Jim Griffin. How cool was that? How 6 lines of code could save your life one day. I absolutely love that. That's brilliant. And what's the name of the podcast again, Jim? AI Master Group podcast. Fantastic. And I hope to hear a lot of you on the AI Master Group podcast. And this is a great reminder that this event is built by you, the community. So please do let us have your ideas for speakers for future events. We absolutely love it. Now I'm looking for Hannah with the cube of power, the magical cube of power. Yes, there she is. And we have a tiny bit of time for a question, I would say. Do we have a question? So it can be about the podcast. Yes, indeed. We got a question from the front row here. It's easier to come over here.
Hey, awesome. Great talk. I'm curious, this is running on a drone at the edge, and you have this issue of being so high up with relatively small detection. What techniques are you using for that? Are you using like some kind of, Sahi type of technique to detect those sharks, or is there any special post-processing that you need to do?
Okay, so the question is it being, basically, fundamentally, the question is it being done on the edge? And it is, okay. Because it's actually transmitting already a message, an SMS message to all of those 80 recipients. So it cannot have a lag. It obviously cannot go into the cloud and then be processed. It has to happen very fast. So that's why it's nano. That's why the nano is being used.
And then the issue with, potentially really small detections, if you're flying that high up, how are you guys handling that?
Well, this is the thing. We don't know what we're missing, and it's not very easy, right? Some of the sharks are well below the surface. It's easier to spot one when you've got a nice fin there sticking above that classic look of that fin. But you saw in some of those videos those choppy waves and a shark heading into the choppy waves, and then even you or I could not tell what happened to him. So it's pretty difficult, actually. Yeah. Fantastic. So that's a kudo or a shout out to Ultralytics, because really the ability for that nano model inside of a drone to identify those, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well said, well said. And is there an episode of your podcast that goes into some of these topics by any chance? All right, so I hope you all subscribe to Jim's podcast. I hope lots of you go on his podcast as guests. But before that, please join me in showing your appreciation to Jim Griffin. Thank you. Always good to